So again, this is what CrazyBump looks like when you're open. So if you haven't had a chance to play with it, CrazyBump again, it's really hard to screw up. I mean, you can have stuff look bad at the end, but you can't mess it up. Like literally, it's all a bunch of sliders. You just slide it, and it interactively will display what's going on. So choose a shape that best represents. Usually, this one on the right is the way to go. A lot of times, you know, what's popping forward versus what's recessed. I think I like this. And I'm going to put this on a column. You can choose any shape. As soon as you click here, it'll stop rotating. And the first window you start with is the normal map. How intense do I want this normal? Well, do I want, 25%? Do I want something really crazy wicker action? You can see that's really some intense pop. Maybe 45 sounds good. If you have no extra noise in your map, you can smooth it out, you can get rid of it. You can sharpen it up a little bit if you want to. Make it a little crisper. The shape recognition, you can, again, you slide it, interactively show. The shape recognition will give it, as light wraps around it, it will take the light more versus being flat. Okay, so you can see this in your window. Okay, I want to have a little bit more fine detail, maybe a little bit more here. Tone this one down. And overall large detail, I don't know, I'll do something like that. So I just play with it, and I'll leave it open. If I go and I don't like it, I can easily change it. I'm not committed to anything here. If it doesn't, it takes like 10 minutes at most to try to play around and then go in, see what it looks like, and then well, that normal map's way too strong, right? Well, you can see it when you put it into Maya. The normal map was way too strong. Well, go back into CrazyBump and dial it back a little bit. Or, I'm not getting enough fine detail in that normal map. I'm going to raise up the fine detail. So again, displacement map will actually, you can use it to actually displace geo if your engine supports it. The occlusion map is right here, so I can tweak this and you can interactively, again, see what's going. Enhanced detail, if you turn it down, it blurs out the occlusion. This up here tightens it up. So it just depends on what you want to get. And I can dial this down so I can see a little bit more. Something like that maybe I want. Could work. This depends on how much. I just want to keep it in the recess, but you can see the occlusion is going where the insets are in between the wood, the woven wood. Seems to be what I want. Specular, how hot do I want this? Do I want this to be a little bit brighter like this thing has just been dipped in shellac? Okay, or do I want something that's rather dark, like this, that's like a rough, unfinished wood that's been weathered? You know what I mean? If I use something like this, I'd probably bring this into Photoshop and darken out these highlights as well. But you can see I can control that specular. So maybe I'm going to do something in here. And again, if it doesn't look good, I can always do it. Sometimes in here, in the diffuse, you can also, it has a tool to remove highlights that's not way better in Photoshop. So you can add some 3D highlights. I don't really use that. You can color correct it. They still, well, it looks like they might have removed it. There used to be a metallic, so I can flatten this out too. So here's the shading. Maybe I'm going to flatten this one out a little bit. Okay. And I'm going to save all my textures. And I'm going to save these as Targas. I'm going to save this as 03. Just saved them all out. I saved it out in like a second because it's only 256. I'm going to come back into Photoshop. I don't want to save this. And since I saved these, I saved out a new diffuse I did a little bit more post-process to in CrazyBump. Where did I save that? Here we go. So I got color, occlusion, and specular. I don't need that displacement. But I'm going to grab, here's my new color map. I'm going to grab that occlusion. And the occlusion map is something you add on top of your diffuse to add more pop. So I'm going to hit Control A, Control C, and I'm going to paste it on top of my diffuse layer, or my diffuse map in Photoshop. I'm going to change its layer properties to a multiply, and you can see how that helps recess it a little bit. Yes?
So you're using the color, the occlusion, and the spec up on there?
This is just a diffuse. You could use, this is the diffuse that CrazyBump or color map do the same thing. That, well, technically not, but we'll just pretend they're the same. That CrazyBump sped out to me, and then the occlusion map. This is the occlusion map that I got from CrazyBump. I'm copying this, and I'm pasting it in here so it goes on a new layer. I'm changing the layer properties of occlusion to multiply, and then I can just multiply it over top, and you can see it feeds in to fill in some of those recessed areas. Okay. And I can dial that up, or I can bring it back depending on how dark I want it. You really don't want anything to be black, completely black. Even if it's really dark, all it's going to do is lose detail. You know, when it does go that dark, it's because it should be because the lighting in the game space has done that, not per se the map. Do you have a question, Carl? You good? Okay. So, yep.
When I put the combine the occlusion onto the color map, it darkens it really a lot.
So then you'd want to lighten it up. If it's depending on what your occlusion looks like from CrazyBump, maybe you need to lighten it up. So if this is what this looks like normal, say yours is too dark, you can come in and adjust its levels under image adjustments, and say I want mine to be more dark, right? I could adjust the midtones, or I could bring the midtones out so it's not darkening it so much. Or I could bring the white down and have it more like this. So you can adjust that occlusion layer independently. So maybe I want a little bit more mid-tone on mine. I honestly don't think that looked all that great. I think I'm just going to go with something like this. And I usually put mine around 70 to 80%. It really depends on how that occlusion was created. I just want to be mindful. I don't want to get too dark, but it's in a Photoshop doc. Like if it ends up not looking very good, I can always easily change the power of that occlusion and just update it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this one as a target, and then I don't have to flatten my layers. If I save it as a target, it's going to auto flatten them for me in the target and maintain my layers here. So I'm just going to call this wicker B for this section diffuse. Again, it's 24-bit because I don't have an alpha map. And in the specular map, here's my spec. If I need to brighten this up, I can do the same thing. I can try to increase it in here, levels, and try to brighten it up. The thing is, it's usually easier to go, just a heads up, it's easier to go darker than it is lighter typically, so. But I kind of want to have a nice, range typically. So if this spit out something that was just too dark to work with, I could always go back into CrazyBump, go to my specular, lighten this up a little bit, click here and just say save specular file only instead of all of them if I needed a new one. You know, so I'll usually I'll let CrazyBump stay open and just get what I need after my initial take. So I'm just going to call this good here, and I could bring this in like this. But when you saw the initial picture, the highlights on the wood seemed to be rather white. You know, the highlight that it was bouncing back seemed to be pretty bright and white, meaning it kind of had like a varnish type finish. To get a white highlight back at you, the specular color needs to be a complementary color of what that diffuse is. So if I just leave a black and white spec map, it's probably going to bounce back whatever color my actual diffuse is. Okay, so if I want to get a white highlight back, I need to look at my wicker here. So I could just come over here and just color pick something in here. And the easiest way to really do this is just to come over to your spec, fill this with the main color of your diffuse or whatever part you wanted, and then go image, hue saturation, and just move this 180. So that's obviously the complementary color. It's on the opposite end of the color spectrum. And I don't want something that saturated typically in my diffuse. You usually want something a little bit darker and quite a bit less saturation. So something like that. And a lot of times I'll just roll this as a multiplier and then just dial it back a little bit. So you can just see it's just a little bit of color. I just want a little bit of that color so it's not straight white on my specular. I don't know, we'll test it out and see what it looks like. And I'm going to go ahead and save this as a target. So this is my spec here. And I can just do S for spec. Okay? So I'm going to come into Maya now. I'm going to go ahead and nuke this.